understand that how different contribution can also be with different school of thought in that sense. But remember that when people have contributed, they never bothered to think that whether their thought process or their theory will be clubbed in certain way. Okay, so it is similar to your some of the vague classification that exist in the macroeconomic school of thought. Similarly, in the economic theory of firm, people who write survey, they have written about, okay, we can classify in so many ways the theory of firms, how they have developed over time. But again, there is no agreement as such among the scholars about how to classify different contribution in terms of different schools of thought. Okay, so today I will be just taking you those four major schools of thought, which is mainly Gibbon's own creation to some extent and in agreement with some of the other previous scholars who have also similarly thought about it. Okay, so the Coase and Williamson were basically the precursor to the entire theory of firm, and the major thrust point is transaction cost theory. But you will see that Williamson, when you read Gibbon's, Williamson's contribution can be other schools. Okay, so the major contribution is that they recognize the existence of transaction cost whenever there is a transaction that has to be done in the marketplace. And as compared to that, most of your economic literature till then was thinking that in market transaction there is no cost, in a sense that it's a competitive market, people can go and buy stuff without being bothered about anything. But Coase and Williamson's major contribution is that there always exist contracts between the suppliers and the buyer, and as a result, there are problems with those contracts, and there are always some cost of transactions when some transaction is taking place outside the firm. Okay, but what is not clear in Williamson's theory is that you can obviously take care of some of the opportunism that exists when the parties are different. They are separated in terms of their entity, but it's not clear that what happens if the parties are integrated under the umbrella called firm. Does it mean that all the opportunism will be going away? So in other words, this Williamson's contribution leaves two important questions unanswered. That is, how does integration succeed in eliminating ex post opportunism? Okay, so in other words, even if the two parties, they are working under the same firm, but what prevents them to be opportunistic and be self-interested, thereby try to maximize their own kind of utility or own kind of objective, and that would itself hold up certain things, and that will create a situation of non-transactions which happens within the market structure. So it is not clear that integration necessarily solves the problem of opportunism inside the firm thoroughly. Okay, just being together under the same umbrella of a firm doesn't mean that people will have similar objective functions so that they do not become opportunistic. Okay, so that's one important question that remains unanswered by Williamson. Second is that even if you integrate, that does not mean that there are only benefits of integration. Okay, there can be cost of integration also. So that part is also Williamson is very silent about, not able to properly capture by all the writing that he has done. Then Grossman Hart came out with a somewhat more comprehensive thing based on, again, the incomplete contract. That means that contracts cannot specify all states of nature or all actions in advance. So which means and that happens because the economic agents are boundedly rational. Okay, so all the contracts should be necessarily in nature. And second, that what I was trying to also tell you in the other class, that there are states of nature or actions which cannot be verified by third parties ex post, that whether there is a breach of contract or there is a under delivery of certain things as per the contracted terms. So in such a context, those contracts which are not verified by the third parties ex post cannot be enforceable in the court of law, which means writing such a contract is meaningless. Okay, so ex ante those things will also then remain non-contractable, so they cannot be contracted upon because you do not have redressal in case of failure of the contract from one of the sides, okay, or breach of contract from one of the sides. So best evidence that in reality you do have incomplete contract is to observe that we often observe renegotiation. Now, any complete contract will be foolproof contract, all contingencies defined and everything. So which means those complete contracts can never need to be renegotiated. But whenever you see that there is a possibility of improvement or there is a possibility of renegotiation which can improve the situation in terms of efficiency or other things, so which means that the initial contract was incomplete in nature. Otherwise, everything should have been laid down and cast in stone, and people should have followed the contracted terms with respect to all the contingencies that arise. Okay, so given that we do often observe renegotiation, which means that most contracts are incomplete in nature. Okay. So then when contracts are incomplete and consequently not all uses of an asset can be specified in advance, the contract negotiated ex ante inevitably leaves some discretion over the use of the assets. And here comes the Grossman-Hart's major contribution, that who decides in these contractual holes? Grossman-Hart defined the owner of the firm as the party who have the right to decide in all the contractual holes, that is the party with the residual rights of control. So far in Coase-Williamson, this aspect was never highlighted, that owner has certain rights which other people will not have, and as a result, some decisions can be taken by the owners because the residual rights of control is vested in the owner. Okay. So this is a major contribution by Grossman-Hart, and residual rights give the owner the ability to hold up the other party. So how this is happening? So imagine that there is a transaction going on and there is an asset. And when there is an asset and the owner owns the asset, so it essentially then means that the owner can decide about the use of that asset if there is any problem between the two parties in carrying out the relationship. Now, when such a thing arises, owner being the owner as the residual rights of control over the asset will decide what to do with that asset. So that gives the owner the additional power. Now, this power does not necessarily mean that the transaction will fall flat. This possibility of owner enjoying that additional power actually determine the division of surplus. So division of surplus that will take place in case of any hold-up problem or that incomplete contract leading to some contractual failure and nothing is specified ex ante in the contract. In those situations, the owner decides. Now, by deciding, it doesn't necessarily mean that owner separates itself out and go out of the relationship. What it does essentially, that this gives him additional bargaining power, that look, I have the option of taking away the asset and put it into some best possible use, and that essentially decides the owner's bargaining power through the disagreement payoff. So in Grossman-Hart, all the bargainings are taken to be Nash bargaining and efficient. So it happens in frictionless environment, okay? But the advantage of that asset ownership is that it gives additional power to the owner, okay? And that defines how the different parties should actually come into terms when there is some kind of asset involved or some kind of investment has to be made. Now, when these investments are made, and if you make one of the parties as owner, that owner will have additional incentive to protect the investment, okay? And also to contribute in a big way to that investment. But on the other hand, the other party will also tend to underinvest. And then Grossman-Hart says that the optimal governance structure is the one which maximizes the ex ante surplus. Now, this Grossman-Hart story will be elaborating in details with the help of a formal model later. But just to give you the basic structure, because so far we have only covered Coase, Williamson, and Grossman-Hart is an important building block in the process of theory of the firm. And then we'll move on to the 4 different theories of the firm. And in that case, you will be mostly reading them from the Gibbons paper. So Grossman-Hart, the optimal governance structure is the one which maximizes the ex-ante surplus. So in other words, the people who has the major contribution, who can make the major contribution to the relationship through the investment, should be made the owner of that particular entity where the contributions are made by different parties, okay, in terms of investment. Maybe it is asset of some sort, physical or mechanical, technical, or capital goods, whatever it is, okay. The guy who can make the maximum investment would obviously, if he is made the owner, it will have the greater incentive to make those contributions, which will improve the surplus in the relationship. So the optimal governance structure is the one which maximizes the ex-ante surplus. So the ownership is to be allocated to the party who is making the maximum contribution. But obviously the flip side of that problem is that the other guy who is not contributing enough will have even less interest in making the investment, so it will underinvest. But overall, despite that underinvestment, overall the allocation of ownership would improve the surplus, ex-ante surplus, and that's how the allocation of ownership should be done. Okay. Now moving on to another paper by Hart. This is EJ 1995. It has talked about that governance is needed, and governance does not matter in the absence of agency problem, okay, because of the following reason. All can be instructed to do their jobs, minimize cost, maximize profit, efforts and other types of cost can be reimbursed. So think of that there is no agency problem means there is no conflict of interest and no moral hazard, no adverse selection. So in such a situation, it is easy to instruct all the parties involved in a relationship who are contributing to the production process, okay, or whatever the value creation process. So everybody can be instructed what do they do. So the major problem arises when there is an agency problem. Agency problem immediately means that the parties have different interest, conflict of interest is there, okay. Now when there is conflict of interest, it is not necessarily that you need a governance structure, okay. So along with that you need uncertainty. Now here is an important statement, which is the neoclassical theory assume that choices and costs are all observable, and so as a result there is no issue in terms of paying to the laborers and everybody will be abide by the intended the objective function that is there of the organization, okay, and there is no conflict of interest. Principal agent problem actually departs from that neoclassical theory by introducing that different agent has different objectives, so there is a conflict of interest, okay, and that's a major departure from the standard production function of FLK, where as if L and K are taken to be either homogeneous or there can be multiple types of labors, but all can be instructed what do they do. So there is no agency problem in the production function FLK. But as soon as you depart from that and introduce the principal agent problems, you realize that your profit or output will depend on the effort level, okay. There can be many other factors of production, but there is one important element called effort, which cannot be contracted upon ex ante, okay. And in that case, you are confronting the moral hazard problem. But not only that, you are also facing the difficulty in terms of the uncertainty. So just conflict of interest between the parties does not tell you that you need a governance structure. What you essentially you will face is agency problem plus uncertainty. Now, when you have uncertainty as well as agency problem, then you have that you can design an incentive contract, definitely, where I is the incentive paid to the party who is actually exerting the effort E. So you can give this incentive contract. but there is a trade-off between incentive and risk sharing, because this contract is not directly dependent on your E. It is dependent on the outcome, that is profit. Now, if you make your incentive contingent on profit, which is subject to uncertainty because of the epsilon term, so you can understand that you are exposing your agent to the risk. Okay. So as soon as you give this kind of incentive contract, there is a trade-off between incentive and risk sharing. Now, if you give high power incentive, that means too much dependent on the pi. Okay, I is too much sensitive to pi. That means the payment to the agent I will also be too much variable, and that variability will depend on the variability of pi. So which means that you are actually exposing too much your agent to the risk. On the other hand, to protect the agent from the risk, you can give low power incentive, but that essentially then takes away the incentive of exerting more effort. So optimal balancing, that risk efficiency trade-off, is what this literature does. Okay. So these are some of the second best contract, because under this situation, when you have agency problem plus uncertainty, you would not be able to go to the first best. So as a result, you will be ending up with second best, and some of the second best contract will to take the shape of performance related payment to the agent. Okay, and this performance is measured with respect to the pi, not related to the input that it provides in terms of E. Stock options, so if the company does well in the future, so you can make the payments to the manager or whoever is appointed as the agent in this particular context. So that particular agent who is putting the effort and making the firm value better or worse, if the stock option is given, which means that in future this guy can sell the stocks and earn money, so it will actually incentivize that particular manager or the laborer who is having the stock option. Now also you can have a situation, so the incentive contract can also be in the form of when to replace the manager. So you can simply fire the manager. Okay. And also you can decide on when the firm's asset to be bought and sold. So these are different form of incentive contract that are actually practiced in the corporate world, keeping in view that in most situations there is agency problem and uncertainty. Okay. Now,
Sir,
yes.
sir, could you please elaborate on the fourth point, when the firm's assets are to be bought and sold?
Yeah, so this is an important point. I'm just keeping somewhat, you can say, holding back on this issue, but the issue is simple. So in the corporate governance literature, typically shareholders are taken to be the principal and managers are taken to be the agent. Okay. Now the managerial discretion is too much dependent on the scale of operation of the manager and how they are given the discretion. Okay. Now when the firm's assets to be bought and sold, this is the way you can actually discipline the manager, because if you buy new asset and bring in new manager who will actually interact with you, that indirectly curtail some of your discretion. Okay. Similarly, your manager might be too much hung up with respect to, say, maybe IPL. Okay. So just to get a lot of exposure and lot of the publicity, or maybe some kind of empire building, says right now in Corona time, that's not very exciting, but developing some resort and all that. So your manager might be too much focused on certain things, some particular key asset. Okay, because that it wants to publicize and wants to take credit of. You can simply sell off that asset, you being the owner of the firm. Okay, that will reduce the managerial discretion. So buying and selling of asset are also disciplining device for the manager. Okay. So the agency problem and uncertainty gives you some structure that you need, governance. Okay. But that's not enough. What is important is that even with agency problem and uncertainty, if you think of that, there are insurance companies who can come and adequately insure the different economic agents, then agency problem and uncertainty would not give you a good theory of the firm. Okay, so what you need is agency problem and incomplete contract. Okay, so here, until agency problem and uncertainty, we are still imagine that even when we did our game theory course, we never thought that these contracts are incomplete, in a sense that this I equal to I pi will be fully observed, in a sense that there will be no breach of contract. Okay, but the problem arises that when you have incompleteness in the contract, so along with existence of good quality insurance product, this agency problem and uncertainty to a large extent can be taken care of without having much of the governance issues in the forefront. But main problem arises that you have incomplete contracts. So you cannot make all the state contingent contract. As a result, you need governance. And what is that governance? Now, governance is a mechanism for making decisions that have not yet been specified in the initial contract. Okay, precisely, it allocates residual rights of control over the firm's non-human assets. So now you just tie it back with the Grossman-Hart, which was somewhat earlier in 1986. So ownership is just one such kind of instrument. Okay, and there can be plenty of other instruments which we will gradually look into. So there are four broad classes of theories of the firm. When you read Gibbons, you will find that this is how the entire literature is classified. But remember one thing, when Grossman-Hart or all these people wrote, they never thought that they will be termed in some kind of club. So whatever that have come to their mind, what they found to be of importance for the existence of firm or the theory of firm, they have mentioned in that spirit. But however, later, after observing so many historical development in different types of theory, people have tried to classify them in different categories, just for the convenience of remembering and looking into different things. So, for example, Williamson is clubbed in many different schools, okay, because Williamson, almost 30 years, he wrote on different issues on related to firm theory. So, he has been in many theories. Now, rent-seeking theory, this is informal theoretical arguments mainly provided by Williamson, Klein, and some empirical work. Now, rent-seeking theory is essentially that you will have some kind of problem of negotiation, incompleteness of contract, okay, and all that. As a result, given that the agents are opportunistic, they will try to extract some additional surplus from the relationship that is ongoing. Okay, and because of that rent-seeking attitude, you will try to minimize that rent-seeking attitude in the form of a single entity called firm, so that the different agents who are working inside will have lesser incentive to seek such rent. So this is rent-seeking theory is essentially when there is a transaction, different parties will try to extract as much surplus as possible, and that will lead to the problem of market transaction. So you better organize inside the firm, so that if you make the product yourself, then this rent seeking the tendencies can be minimized. Okay. Second school of thought is known as property rights theory. This is Grossman-Hart, Hart, Moore, and Hart. Okay. So this is that you allocate the property rights, and ownership is just the allocation of property right to one of the economic agents who is part of these transactions. So owner decides on the allocation of the assets if there is any contractual problem that arises. Okay, so these property rights, which is ex ante given to the asset owner, can actually play a significant role both in terms of initial investment, that means ex ante increasing the surplus from the relationship, and it can also act as a useful instrument whenever there is some kind of the state of some kind of impasse that is created. Okay, so whenever there is holding up problem, or people want to have their kind of extra surplus from the relationship and try to create a situation of negotiation. The ownership helps in terms of settling those issues, okay? Because owner will get the maximum share from that kind of tendencies. Now, incentive theory, Holmstrom, Milgrom, and Holmstrom, Tirol, this is an accidental theory of the farm. This is nothing but the principal agent theory. So, in this theory, they have not looked at the issue of ownership as such. Okay, they have looked at the incentive problem when there are people who are working together. So, the moral hazard and team and similar issues were the major issues in incentive theory, and how all the economic agents can be incentivized in a manner that they contribute significantly to the value creation or the surplus creation. So here the instrument of ownership or those aspects were not given any precedence. It's all about how the incentive problem in a team production setup can be solved. Okay, so that's the incentive system theory. And finally, this is adaptation theory. Simon, Klein, and Williamson again has come here. So this is about that any organizations or any entity across the different economic ups and downs and twists and turns will typically face lots of uncertainties. Okay, when they face uncertainty, any economic organizations, the job of that organization is to adapt to those different contingencies. Okay, and this particular mostly informal, that farm as a theory will evolve because farm as an organization will evolve because that organization has to adapt to different contingencies. Okay, so this is the adaptation theory, and here there will be a boss whose authority will be important. Okay, and this boss's authority is important in case of there is this contract problem that happens. So the boss will decide. That boss is not necessarily known as the owner of the farm. Okay, so that's how they have thought of that. Organization will have hierarchy, and when you have hierarchy, that is helpful in terms of deciding on the issues with respect to different contingency, because boss's authority will be supreme. Okay, so that's how different situation of conflict can be avoided and the organization can move on. So these are simple, some kind of descriptions on all these four things. But here I will take you through this incentive system theory in little bit elaborately. So these are defined in three different subgroups again. And this is nexus of contract view, the farm as a solution to models and teams approach, the farm is an incentive system view. Okay.
So,
Sorry. Yeah.
Sir, I have a question. You explained property rights theory and adaptation theory. Could you please explain the difference between the two again? Like in property rights theory, you said that there's an owner who decides the allocation of investment in case if there's any discrepancy in the contract. Right. In adaptation theory, you said that there needs to be a hierarchy in the organization, and ultimately the owner will decide in case there's any uncertainty.
Right. So yeah, tell me.
So my question is that in property rights theory also, if there's any discrepancy, that is also some kind of uncertainty. So how are the two different?
Different is that you can take care of your asset. You are the owner of the asset. Okay, that's your additional bargaining power. But in adaptation theory, within the organization, you are vested with some authority in terms of the hierarchical decision-making ability. So your authority will prevail. Okay, so it is not that you are going away with some asset that is vested on you. It is some decision right that is vested on you. Okay, but in the property rights theory, the property itself, there is a decision right that is vested on you. That is about the allocation of the property. Right. Okay, not about disciplining somebody else or imposing something on somebody that you behave in this particular manner. It is simply a situation of non-cooperation. I will be threatening you that I am taking away with my property. And that it will decide about the disagreement payoff, and then the parties will come to the table negotiate as per the NAS bargaining, and then again redefine their shares of I mean the surplus that they will be dividing under those contingencies. Okay.
Okay, got it, sir.
So this is this is a major difference. Now the incentive theory, there is no asset or anything. So here there are three ways people have looked at this particular incentive theory, how they have evolved and all. Okay, so you can read some of them. You can also read the Gibbons paper. But Holmstrom is a major contribution in this that you might be also reading in some contract theory if there is it is offered somewhere. So the Holmstrom theory is about the moralizer in team, and moralizer in team means, you know by now, that if I give you a group term paper, now one person can be putting too much effort, the other guy is not putting enough effort. When they are actually rewarded with respect to a team production, then it is natural for everyone to free ride on the others. Okay, but that does not mean that the free riding will be so bad that your output or the outcome will be too bad. Okay, that's not true. For example, I don't know whether I told you this. Suppose you need a public good, you know always that there is a free rider problem. But suppose I value the public good too much, so then I myself provide the public good, and it doesn't matter when other people also use it. Okay, so if I want to put couple of lights in front of my house, which also other people get benefits whoever passes through that road. Okay, so it doesn't matter because I am happy because my area is well lit. Okay, so similarly, if someone is too motivated that he or she has to do really well in a particular term paper, then even if that person has some teammate who doesn't contribute enough, still the outcome will be good. So in Holmstrom, this moralizer and team is a typical situation of free rider problem, where basically people will not be contributing enough. So then the major purpose of this kind of team production in a farm where different parties are involved in creating value. So how the incentives to be designed, and they are the major, where is that particular thing, that if you try to NASA, so this is the thing. So that given the unobservable effort levels everybody has to provide, the requirements of the incentive scheme being a Nash equilibrium, which means nobody has the incentive to deviate from their requisite equilibrium effort choice level, and budget balancing, which means that within the farm whatever is produced will be distributed properly with more or less to different entities, and Pareto optimality, so that there is no further possibility of improvement. These three objectives cannot be made in the moralizer in team setup. Okay, so in that setting you cannot have Nash equilibrium, budget balancing, and Pareto optimality. And then people have moved on with higher order of mechanism design problem, how to solve and all, and there you might get some solution, but violating this one of these particular property, Nash equilibrium, budget balancing, and Pareto optimality. One of them will be violated when you try to solve the moralizer problem and give proper incentive. Okay, so here also there are some talks about what's the difference between the Alchi and Dam said that the first round of incentive theory, first group of incentive theory, vis-a-vis Holmstrom contribution. So the role of monitor in the first group of incentive theory is very different to their role in the Holmstrom model. In Holmstrom model, this is going to be that they do not need to balance their budget. So the monitor will inject capital that is needed so that the moralizer of team is solved. So anyway, so these are actually solving incentive problem through different kind of mechanism design. But here it has, as I told you, that it has become an accidental theory of farm, but their major focus, which is the major building block of theory of farm, it is about make or buy decision. So for all the transactions that are there for the farms, which one of them will be internalized in terms of to be made in-house, and which are the transactions to be left out in the market, okay, that is you buy from the market. That decision does not play much role in this particular incentive system theory, so they have not actually looked into this. But given that this particular branch of theory has been very powerful in terms of sophisticated model and design, they tend to throw some light about the theory of farm that is possible, okay. But again, they do not consider any asset or other kind of issue.
Sir, I have one question. That if behavior is unobservable, then how can we observe it? It said that if
What is
you
not
observe the
observable? Sorry, I'm not getting you. Can you just, your voice is breaking.
Sir, if your behavior is unobservable, then how can we observe that behavior and then implement the Pareto optimality and that you said?
Oh, in the model in team, the effort choice is not observable, okay? But there are other assumptions that you make, that you know that how the different effort and the related cost, okay? Now, if you are able to observe those related costs, then you can actually design a mechanism through which you will be able to optimally balance the contribution of different parties, okay. So even if I do not observe directly your effort choice, but your payment structure should be such that you will be making the optimal contribution as required by your Nash equilibrium behavior there, okay. So for example, all the Morleza problem in a single agent problem, you know that if I make your payment contingent on the output, and then if output is positively related to your effort choice, then I'm actually taking care of your incentive problem in a big way. Now, uncertainty cluttered that problem. So all these things are incorporated, and they looked into each and everybody's contribution, their cost functions, and then come out with a proper optimal mechanism through which these three kind of things can be tackled. But then Holmström's major contribution is that you cannot satisfy these three properties, that is budget balancing, which seems to be the major problem. So if you deviate from the budget balancing and introduce that I can inject fund into the system, okay, how I get that fund, that's a separate issue, then I will be able to optimize the whole thing. And this fund injection can also be then later can be tackled by that I do some kind of lump sum taxation on all the economic agents, okay? So, or all the parties that were involved in the production process. So, but in any case, that is that was the first fundamental paper on the mechanism design in the Morleza of team. And then last 20 years, the literature has actually moved quite a bit, okay? So if you are interested, you can go to any mechanism design course and learn some of them, okay? So even if you do not observe, incentive can be designed so that you come out with your best possible contribution, because your outcome is dependent on that, okay? Clear? Think of term paper writing. I can have a mechanism where the screening will be too sharp. So as a result, although there is Morleza and team, you will be forced to optimize the joint product that you are producing with your teammates, because otherwise I can have a mechanism that if anybody underperforms, the entire group's performance would be very badly graded, okay? So that motivates that targets the underperformer in a manner that underperformer will not be possible and the other team members will not be happy about it, and that will act as a threat on you, and you may be performing well. Okay. So there are variety of ways the incentive problems are addressed. So now this particular analytical part I'm just keeping for the time being. I will be doing it in the next class much more rigorously. So just to take you through some of the problem that happens in the farm context. So typically, as I told you, that modern corporation, there is a separation of ownership and control, which means although the managers, they control the day-to-day activities of the farm, but it is finally the shareholders who own the farm because they are the true owner. Okay. Now, so in such a context, in the managerial behavior cannot be, manager cannot be given a full kind of complete contract about all the contingencies that will appear by the shareholders. So managers have a lot of discretion. And so given those discretion, managers will try to maximize their own objective function. Okay. And they have plenty of ways to actually misbehave, and this misbehavior can manifest in the form of, they can simply expropriate funds, okay, that is available by juggling the account and other things. They can do entrenchment in investment projects. So as I was telling you, the IPL and other kind of resort and other kind of investment, so which may not be giving too much of valuation to the shareholders. It will not generate enough returns. But if they invest in those kind of assets, they might get some personal benefit, and those personal benefit not necessarily in terms of money. First point was about money. They can expropriate fund. Second point is not about money. It is about their favorite project or preferred project they can invest. Similarly, they can do a lot of transfer pricing. Transfer pricing, especially in the context of international multinational corporations, you might be aware because there are news writing here and there. So the transfer pricing is essentially that when you buy inputs, you can actually get higher quotation for the input, through which you siphon off fund from the current company and transfer it to the input seller, where the manager himself might have greater kind of stake or shareholding, or maybe it is the relatives company, or in the case of multinational, what happens when they settle the international transaction, do the transfer pricing. So they try to price in a manner that only the companies located, they are all subsidiaries located in the tax havens, are getting the maximum profit, and all other companies in all other countries are earning very little money. Okay. They try to channelize their import through those tax haven companies and jack up prices in a manner that the company at the other places are not making enough money, okay, enough profit. And the fourth point is private benefit. So apart from the all these possibilities from different kind of behavior, the manager, they themselves get private benefit. This private benefit of managing a very large corporation can give you a lot of own personal benefit, which cannot be traded in the market, which cannot be valued in terms of money. So these are all private benefits. Okay. So also that will give you private benefit. You cannot trade that with your friends who are not in the list. So these are called private benefit. It cannot be traded in the market. So managers being in a super company, okay, which is getting a lot of attention, not only media but other kind of things, as good or bad or whatever. So this gives rise to private benefit to the managers of those companies. Okay. Now, to solve this kind of managerial problem, whenever there is a farm, and given that the owner of the farm is not necessarily managing the farm, so there are agency issues. Managers are appointed. I'm just talking about managers. There can be labor hierarchy of personnel in the organization. Okay, so the typical way the incentive contracts that are given is incentive pay, threat of dismissal. That's also very important. Okay, threat of dismissal. that if I find you that you are doing something wrong, then I will simply dismiss you from your job. So that threat of firing or dismissal play a great role in terms of managers behaving well. The last thing is career concern. Nobody wants to be fired because it is good to leave a company gracefully, but not to be fired. If you fire, it looks bad on your CV. Okay, so that's why if every manager has a career concern. So everybody wants to do well in their present company, not because that they are paid extra, but that if the company does well, then they will be having an outside opportunity that they are working in that good company. So the other companies will be offering them much better deal. So nobody wants to be manager of a company which is going to be bankrupt. Everybody wants to be manager of a company which does well, so that post that appointment in that company, they can actually move on to a better company. So they have career concern. Nobody wants to jeopardize their career. Okay. So here there is an empirical regularity. Jensen and Mark, shirking of effort on the part of the manager is not a major problem. Significant of all the transfer pricing and personal perks which bleeds the company. Okay, so these are the two. Basically, stealing of the money in some form or the other is what is the major culprit in all these agency problem. It's not that they work less. So it is not effort supply that is a major problem. In fact, they work harder to make all this possible, transfer pricing and enjoying personal perks, so that they can jig the account accordingly. Okay.